All right, welcome back to our YouTube special where I get to ask Ben Rhodes lots of dumb questions so that he can give worldos. Worldos, that's both the people who are foreign policy curious and those who are full-blown foreign policy nerds, so they can get some foundational knowledge here. So this time we're asking, how do the Olympics work? Because obviously we've all been watching the Olympics in Paris, and behind all of the incredible athletic achievements and the medal counts and the grit and the determination, the personal stories, there are, of course, politics and global politics. I feel like people like to say keep politics out of the Olympics, but it's impossible. It's always been there. So, Ben, you ready for this?
I'm ready for this.
Thank you for indulging my questions, as always.
I like this idea. I was excited when you pitched this idea.
This is all Phoebe. Shout out to our video producer, Phoebe. So there is something called the IOC, the International Olympic Committee, that is the overall big governing body. But can you just tell us a little bit about how it works? Because I think that, people want to know how it is that decisions are made, who has certain authority, like when a scandal pops up, who ultimately has the responsibility, and we'll get into some of that too.
Yeah, well, it's a fairly opaque process, but essentially you have the International Olympic Committee, which is kind of this faceless international bureaucracy that administers the Olympics, right? Deep roots in Europe, based in Switzerland, which is the perfect place for it, right? A neutral country, but also in the heart of the West, What the IOC essentially does is it manages both the interaction with all of the national federations, right? So every country has its own kind of Olympic federation that manages, the U.S. Olympic team or X country's Olympic team. They're kind of like the member states of a UN type enterprise. And then the IOC is the kind of umbrella organization above it with a very powerful president at the center. IOC members, they vote anonymously for who the host city is. And the kind of division of labor is, right, each country manages their own Olympic team and Olympic sports process. The IOC kind of manages the relationship with all the different member states, but also manages the very critical selection of a host country, and then interacts with those host country around the planning of the games, but largely defers to the host. They put in bids to the IOC to be selected, and then kind of the IOC in the run-up to the games is working with both that host country and all the international federations to plan the Olympics. I hope that helps.
Yeah, I think that was a really good explanation that, it's not just the IOC, that then it kind of just like extrapolates out from there. And one thing that I find interesting too is that, so there's 106 members of the IOC, and they don't represent the interests of the individual countries. Rather, they represent the interests of the IOC in those countries. So it is still kind of like the big overarching body here. And so when it comes to choosing where the Olympic Games are held, to voting, I guess we can't really say it's historically a clean process, right? But if you look at the world of, soccer or football, FIFA is now just infamous, notorious, right, for the levels, the deep-seated corruption that's there. Where does the IOC stack up compared to FIFA, would you say?
I mean, historically, there have been a lot of allegations and a lot of whiff of corruption in the more extended past, back in the 20th century. There were allegations of literally vote buying, essentially, a few $1 million going to individual IOC members to get their vote for hosting a games. And that's where the corruption has been alleged to have taken place, essentially in the selection process, because there are billions and billions of dollars at stake when it comes to like who will actually host those games. And so there's been vote buying in the past. My own personal experience of this was in 2009. We were in the final round of essentially selection for the host city in 2016. Chicago had a bid, and it was one of the finalists. There was like, I don't know, 4 or 5 finalists. And Barack Obama was from Chicago, and he'd just been elected, and he was riding high. His approval ratings globally are through the roof. And so we flew all the way to Copenhagen, where the IOC was going to have the final round of voting to announce this. We fly overnight, land in Copenhagen. Michelle Obama makes a speech. Barack Obama makes a speech, trying to charm everybody. Everybody's taking pictures, and there's a buzz. The Obamas being there. So we got on that plane thinking, oh, we got this. And Obama, by the way, had made calls in the run-up to different leaders, supporting Chicago. we literally had champagne. This is embarrassing to say. We had champagne on ice in Air Force One because we were going to get the news while we were flying back. And we learned that Chicago's eliminated on the first round of voting.
Ugh.
And
then you really pop the bottle of champagne.
And so
let's drink our sorrows away.
Yeah, drink our sorrows away. Now, I will just say, this has never been confirmed, so I'm wading into conspiracy theory.
Okay.
But Rio got the 2016 games, Russia got the 2014 Sochi Olympics, and there was always this kind of, rumor mill out there that Lula and Putin had made some kind of deal or something, or, Putin was definitely like leaning on people pretty hard, really wanted the Sochi Olympics. You hear about kind of transactionalism like that.
Mm-hmm.
They might not even be, by the way, corruption, like outward corruption of like vote buying, but it could be
it's called diplomacy, Ben.
Yeah, well, or trading, right? Like I will lean on a bunch of people to vote for Rio to get the games in exchange for you having supported Sochi getting these games, So that kind of horse trading takes place too. So some of that's not like out and out old school, like here's $5 million for your vote, but it is, it's not necessarily like which city, I'll ask you, Alyona, as a Russian,
Ooh.
Would you choose to put the Winter Olympics in Sochi, a Black Sea resort?
I went to the Olympics in Sochi, but yes, it's very funny because of all places in Russia, this is like the warm place that people go to
the
for
furthest
vacation.
south you can go. Yeah.
So it was perhaps slightly questionable in that regard, but I went to all of the ski and snowboard events and stuff like that too. Like there was plenty of snow.
No, I'm sure it was great games, but the thing that did happen is that, and this is not on the IOC at all, that was a famously corrupt process in the sense that all the contracts for building massive pieces of infrastructure to support those games went to Putin cronies.
Yeah.
And the Navalny operation and Boris Nemtsov actually put out a bunch of reports around Putin-friendly oligarchs getting billions of dollars worth of contracts. And the allegation that wasn't hard to follow the trail is that then Putin got kickbacks from getting those contracts, and so the Olympics can become a boondoggle for whatever city's hosting them, and in that one, some not so good characters might have made a lot of money.
Yeah, of course. And I remember too in Sochi that there was the controversy over the hotels were unfinished, and all the Western journalists were kind of complaining about it too. So it's like clearly someone skimmed some money.
Yeah. Somebody was making some money.
They couldn't finish a hotel room. That Olympics was interesting for me too, though. Because my mother was an Olympian. She lit the torch in the opening ceremony in the 2014 Olympic Games. She did.
I didn't know she lit the torch.
And so I was there at the opening ceremony watching her do that, and it was
Wait, not many people get to see their parents.
It was a pretty it was a pretty cool and emotional moment, and it's just such a bummer that.
How old were you at the time?
I was in my.
Not trying to date you.
I was 14. No, I was in my 20s. I mean, that was 10 years ago.
That's a pretty proud moment, seeing your mom light the Olympic torch.
It was very cool. Just a couple little details too here, because you mentioned that this is the corruption with the IOC dates way back. We have in 1996. Melbourne's bid committee for the Olympics is said to have gotten requests for new cars and brothel visits from IOC members, which were rejected. In 1998, in Nagano, an official burned 10 boxes of documents associated with the bid, and they contained records showing how Nagano paid first-class airfare for 62 International Olympic Committee members and their companions to visit Japan. Sydney escaped an IOC investigation into its successful Olympic hosting bid, but an independent auditor in March 1999 found evidence that the bid committee broke several IOC rules concerning gift giving and travel. It's like there's always this kind of stuff going on.
Whenever you're trying to court a small number of international bureaucrats to choose you, it can lead to some of the more base aspects of human behavior.
Why be an international bureaucrat if you don't get to benefit
you don't get first
from
class,
it?
If you don't get to fly first class, I'll leave out the brothels. But first class and some gifts,
it's the whole point. Yeah. It is the whole point. Okay, so I think there is much more to this,
and there's good to it. I want to say I love the Olympic movement. It does manage to be almost always a positive experience, right? So out of this very sometimes unpleasant sausage making, like there's usually a positive result.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree. Because at the end of the day, it is an event where the world comes together.
It's the only thing
Ages
like it.
in a competition where people show off their incredible athletic prowess and skills and things that they work their entire lives for. And it's like, I think that probably you and me both, every time you watch any of the coverage, it's just like one amazing, inspiring story after another. It's the human aspect of it is absolutely amazing.
And where else do you see North Koreans and South Koreans,
Yeah.
the athletes, there's some bitter rivalries, but there's usually like a rapport across countries. There's just not another event, in which every country can be represented in this way and not be, literally fighting,
Yeah. But speaking of that,
Yes.
let's get into, because of course in the past, there have been boycotts by countries. There are countries that are banned. So Russia, for example, right? They were banned in 2019 by the anti-doping agency, the World Anti-Doping Agency, WADA. That was then shortened to 2 years. But then the IOC banned Russia and Belarus from participating in Paris due to their involvement related to the war in Ukraine. Unlike in Tokyo, where you had 330 Russian athletes, this time around, the individual neutral athletes, as they're meant to be called, there is just about like a dozen of them. How do you look at that? And then some of the more current scandals that we see occurring where people are looking into Chinese swimmers and positive doping tests that they had in the past, but it was the Chinese, right? Like their national federation that chose not to put any type of restrictions on them, and WADA chose not to interfere there, right? Or you have people who were trying to have Israel boycotted from this Olympics if Russia is not being allowed because of Ukraine. Like it's all individual and unique, but just no matter what, you wade into sticky territory.
We've been doing this podcast long enough. I remember we talked about the push to protest and boycott the Chinese games over Xinjiang province. Obviously, the most prominent is the U.S. boycotted the 1980 Olympics after the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan. So the U.S. boycotted the Moscow Olympics. Then the Soviet Union reciprocated by boycotting the 1984 LA Games. The Cold War kind of ended that chapter of boycott policies. I remember as a kid the Cold War infusing the Olympics. It felt like a big Cold War showdown, the U.S. versus the USSR, or the Eastern Bloc countries versus the, quote-unquote free world, whatever. It feels like politics is now returning. Part of what we're seeing is that geopolitical tensions, the Olympics can, for all the feel-good stuff I just talked about, the Olympics becomes a venue for some form of geopolitical competition. I'm continually struck by the fact that Olympic success is equated with like prestige by countries. So like China's really put a huge investment in the Olympic movement and its own athletes and trying to host games. Their own announcement of superpower status is often traced to the hosting of the opening ceremonies of the 2008 Beijing Games. So it is interesting the degree to which China and Russia have kind of ended up in this doping scenario, in part because they seem to equate a degree of Olympic success with a degree of Olympic stature. Mm-hmm. I do think your point about the rules is well taken, because part of what's missing is just there should be kind of harmonized rules. Like instead of just deferring to national federations to make these decisions, you'd like to think that there's like an automaticity to it. And what you worry about is that I do think big countries have more clout, like in anything else. The U.S. has huge clout because U.S. TV rights to the Olympics, are a big part of the Olympic budget. China has big clout because they, are a big, powerful, rich country. And clearly, I think if it had been, a small country with a bunch of swimmers that were caught doping, probably wouldn't be competing, So I think they need to kind of tighten up that there's more transparency and predictability around how the rules are enforced. On Ukraine, they found a way to kick out Russia that was essentially the fact that Russia had tried to formally annex parts of Ukraine that is a member of the IOC, and so therefore they violated the rules. So it wasn't just the war in Ukraine that was the technical reason for expelling them. It was the fact that they had tried to annex the territory of another Olympic committee or something, which felt like an elegant way of just avoiding the awkwardness of Russia being there, to be honest. But, it speaks to the fact that this is all still kind of ad hoc, that there's not a lot of automaticity to who's there and who's not. And I do think it's a bit uncomfortable. I see why Russia and Belarus aren't there. there's the Israel question, but Israel's not the only other country that's in a war. I mean, so I don't know. I tend to favor participation, not for doping athletes, though. I think Russia could have been kicked out for that alone because they had kind of an industrial scale doping enterprise underway. But you'd like to see the rules written down and enforced universally in ways that everybody understands, whether it's about doping or about violations of sovereignty.
Yeah. I also would love to see just some better excuses when people are caught doping, because remember with with the Russian figure skater, it was that she like had something to eat or drink that was her grandfather's. In the case of the Chinese athletes, it was same thing about like something in the burgers that they ate, and it's like,
come on, guys, like we don't just all happen to like eat human growth hormone in our ketchup, you know? Like,
yeah. And then do you have any thoughts on, we could literally go on for, for days and days about the political aspects of the Olympics here, because there are refugee teams.
I love the refugee
that come
team.
up. Yeah,
I think that's one of the best things that the IOC's done in recent years, just because where else can you get a platform for, visibility on refugees in that manner? And the reality is, people have to think of refugees as, there's stages. Like, you are an actual refugee when you're stateless, and then ideally you get a home. Well, right now, there are tens of millions of people that are in that limbo where they're refugees, but they don't yet have a home. So they should be represented. And so I really like that they took that step.
Yeah. This year, there are 37 athletes with 11 different nationalities competing on the refugee Olympic team. So it really is incredible.
I want to ask you, we're going to have to do a quick Ask Alyona here because it's Olympics. I mean, were you able to watch your mom at all? Like, when did she...
When she competed?
Yeah.
I was not born until after she had...
After she was done.
Finished her career. But she...
When did you become aware that your mother was this, like, Olympic hero?
Well, so when I was growing up, my mother coached figure skating. And so I was always around the figure skating world, like at the rink.
Did you know, like, the Russian
I went to competitions with her, and so it was very much, in my orbit.
Other than Sochi, did you go to any Olympics?
I went to Sochi and I went to the Vancouver Olympics. It's always just been a big part of my life. No.
Was there no pressure?
I think I tried. I was not into it, and thankfully my mom didn't pressure me into it because, she grew up like the hard way in the Soviet system where on the one hand,
when you were young, and
that became her life's work and pride, but also like she didn't have a childhood, so I think she
did she have like the gold medals around though? Did you get to like wear the gold medals?
No, they are like secured away, somewhere. I've seen them before, they're not just like sitting around the house.
What were her Olympics that she won?
She won in 72, 76, and 80.
Okay, she was at Lake Placid.
She was at Lake Placid. Yeah, that was the last one. And it was like, there's this kind of iconic image of my mom where she has like one single tear going down her cheek at Lake Placid, when they're like
everybody Google
doing the national anthem. And so lot more we can chew on there.
I mean, we try to analyze the audience with this.
Ben, before we go, as always, I have to make a political foreign policy game out of this. So you are, a former deputy national security advisor, speechwriter. You've had to come up with talking points and try to, explain difficult political positions. So if you had to do PR for the swimming in the Seine River, which has gotten delayed because of E. coli levels. Now athletes are reporting being super sick after competing when the water was cleared to be safe, and billions were spent to clean it up. And part of this is because of all the rain that they're getting. How would you spin this?
I would I would not have done the Seine. I admire the ambition.
Did I
of
say
it.
sane, by the way? Excuse
Well,
me,
yeah,
Seine.
I would. But if I had to spin this, that's a great question.
Get up on that podium. Answer those questions.
I would definitely be passing the buck. I'd be like, well, these authorities approved it. Like that. Sometimes you just got to point the finger in the other direction. Try not to own it.
You should speak to the experts. I'm not the water contamination level expert.
These experts cleared the Seine, for competition. Then blame the rain. Blame nature, something beyond our control. I don't know that I can spin it though.
Hidden forces beyond our control.
Hidden forces beyond our control and faceless water cleanup bureaucrats who swore this was a good idea. I don't know.
I'm being asked to force you to do
Yeah.
one more game really
Okay.
quick. Would you rather sleep in the Olympic Village with no AC, curtains, and a cardboard bed, or swim one short race in the Seine River?
I mean, I gotta tell you, like, as someone who like studied abroad in Paris, like, you always kind of want to jump in the Seine. I do it. I'd put up with like a skin disease for a couple
You
days.
do it, but you wouldn't. Yeah,
How
you
cool
wouldn't.
would it be to
You wouldn't
swim
defend
in the
it.
Seine? You know, yeah. And the Olympic Village can't be that bad, can it? I mean, it's in Paris. Right?
It looks absolutely beautiful.
Yeah, it looks
this
fine to
time
me.
around.
And you walk around, you're bumping into
Hot athletes, left
LeBron
and right.
James and hot athletes. Yeah, it looks pretty good.
That
to
was
me.
one of my assignments in 2014 in Sochi. Was I was working at HuffPost at the time, was to go on Tinder and see how many athletes were on it. And let me just tell you, do I wish my husband at the time boyfriend wasn't my boyfriend at the time? No.
I did. That was the thing I noticed in London. I got to be in like these athletes' lounges, and they're like remarkable specimens of humanity in person. Like they kind of glow, and let's just say they're very fit people. The gene pool selects well for the Olympics.
Indeed. One funny story actually that I just thought of is that, it's not funny, but so Russia's not competing in this Olympics. They are not playing any of the Olympics in Russia right now on television or anything like that. Like, you can't even watch it if you wanted to. And yet, I just know because I've spoken to my mom that she's been like getting calls from journalists, as she always does, to comment on the Olympics. And it's like, just like, and exactly, there's just this like understanding that everyone is like using VPNs and going around
And it's
the
still watching
rules
it?
and the systems.
Yeah.
To still watch it.
Well, yeah, I do feel for athletes in Russia that can participate. I will say, Alyona, my one Olympic experience is I was on the delegation to the closing ceremonies of the 2012 London Games, and that was one of the coolest things. And Michelle Kwan was on that delegation, and I got a bit of behind the curtain of what the figure skating competition is like, and it seems pretty intense.
She's a great gal.
Yeah,
Great
she's
gal, Michelle Kwan.
Now an ambassador.
I hope you all enjoyed that.
Yeah,
We
yeah.
will keep doing more of these. People have asked for explainers on like G7 and G20 and all
Yeah, we'll
sorts
have
of other,
more true explainers.
We'll go
but
back to the nerdy.
We covered a lot of ground here.
the
This
heady
is good.
stuff next time. But subscribe to Pod Save the World on our YouTube channel. Listen to the regular Pod Save the World show. Thanks, Ben.